I don't know what's happening to the screen. So I've started recording. Uh, can we just go live? I'm going to go ahead and admit everybody who's in the waiting room. Now everybody will be joining in directly. Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today for this roundtable on a very unique subject. We are going to be talking about science fiction and the way it impacts science development in technology and innovation, right? And we will also take a look at how science fiction stands in India and what is it that we can do to make it a more interesting topic, make it more viable and more proliferant across India. Uh, I'm Reena Dayal. I represent the Quantum Ecosystems and Technology Council of India, which is chartered with the mission of enabling and acting as a catalyst for accelerating the quantum ecosystem in India. So while we are discussing science fiction in general, we will also touch a little bit about science fiction and quantum, especially because quantum is a very, very unique and different scientific subject. It is a lot more difficult than some of the other science topics that people are aware of. And to that effect, we believe that science fiction has a bigger role to play in tougher topics like quantum, in sparking the imagination of the general public, of the students, and so on. But I don't want to get into too many details of that. We'll have more details coming in, with the very esteemed group of speakers that we have for the roundtable today. We have, representation from authors, from scientists, from technologists, and also from the government. So we have a scientist from the government, from the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor here. Without wasting any time, let me just go ahead and introduce everyone who's on the call. And, what I'm going to request, first of all, a very warm welcome to all the speakers. And as I introduce you, I'll pause after I introduce, and I would love you to talk, one sentence or two sentences about your association. What are your thoughts around science fiction? What is your association with science fiction? Whatever you want to say with regard to that topic. So first of all, let me start with the authors. We have with us Kiran Mandral. Welcome, Kiran. She's an accomplished, acclaimed, prolific, and versatile writer. She has written books on a variety of subjects like romance, psychological thrillers, a touch of horror, non-fiction related books as well, including books on parenting. And her latest book, Rising, tells the stories of 30 remarkable women who changed India. So, very, very talented, Kiran. What do you want to say about science fiction?
Thank you so much, Reena, and very, very honored to be in this distinguished panel. What do I want to say about science fiction? I think science fiction sustained me through a childhood that was very dreary. It gave me glimpses into what humans could do and what was the possibility of a future that I don't know if I will see in my lifetime. Hopefully we're seeing bits and pieces of it in the credit cards and a little, video calls and little stuff is coming true, but there's more to come.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we also have with us Arjun Raj Kent. He is the author of several graphic novels, including Empire of Blood, Reincarnation Man, The Mighty Yeti, and so on. He's also the author of a very pakka murder, so also into mysteries, writing mysteries and stuff like that. Again, very accomplished writer. So Arjun, welcome. What do you want to say about science fiction?
Well, I'm the worst kind of fanboy. I am a fan of everything that has to do with science fiction. I actually am very passionate about Indian science fiction in particular. I think we have a very rich and wonderful and varied history of Indians writing speculative fiction, from Satyajit Ray and his Professor Shompu books to Amitabh Ghosh's Calcutta Chromosome, which of course he doesn't like to identify as science fiction, but we have a rich history of storytelling in India. I think every Indian at his heart is a born storyteller. We love stories, we love cricket, and we love arguing with each other. Which really is what makes us a unique country. And I think it's lamentable that in a country of more than 1 billion people, we don't have sort of viable subculture of science fiction, which I think is beyond the cusp of seeing that change, and I'm glad to be part of it.
All right, thank you so much. And we had another eminent author who was supposed to be with us. I'm going to anyway introduce her because we will be taking her inputs offline. She could not join here because of unforeseen circumstances. Tashin Mehta, who writes fantasy and science fiction. Her short story Rule Book for Creating the Universe is very popular and got a lot of critical and popular acclaim. And she's also written stories which are part of the Golan's Book of South Asian Science Fiction Volume 2, right? And apart from that, she has written novels on multiple topics. So we were very honored that she also agreed to be on this session. Unfortunately, she cannot join us. So, but we'll be in touch with her. Our next speaker is Mr. Anil Sharma, who heads Corporate Incubation and Digital Impact Square for TCS. And by the definition of his role, he's working on emerging and new technology areas. And then in that capacity, Anil, first of all, welcome. I would request you to say a few words about what science fiction means to you.
Yeah, I think what science fiction means to me is, see, my role, right? When you're thinking about innovation, incubation, see, based on where you are coming from, right? The kind of enterprise you are working from, you tend to apply a lot of constraints in mind, right? What is possible, what is not possible. See, science fiction is a fantastic way of opening your mind to possibilities. I think that for me, it opens up possibilities in a very nice way, right? Where no constraints are applied. Of course, it is good to have science fiction as close to science, but then the art of possible, which demonstrated in science fiction, that excites me. So my journey has been, so I'm a big Star Trek fan. So a lot of my learning are from Star Trek. And then I have been also very passionate about Mir publishers. So they used to publish a lot of these science fiction series, right? And wonderfully written books. Then of course, Arthur Clarke, Julius Verne, and many short stories which I like.
All right, thank you so much. We also have with us today Mr. Nikhil Malhotra, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of Tech Mahindra. And I think I remember a particular panel discussion where he, myself, and a couple of other technologists were there, and our discussion actually drifted towards science fiction. And I understand you were a Star Trek fan. Also, from an innovation perspective, working on emerging and futuristic technologies, defines CTO's or a CIO's role, Chief Innovation Officer's role. I'm sure this is a topic which is very close to you. So welcome, Nikhil. What is your association with science fiction? I'm sure everyone would love to hear that.
No. So first of all, morning, Reena, and morning, everybody. Thank you so much for setting this up. I remember this was a discussion we had about a couple of months back, and I can already see some familiar faces. Anil is there. Sunil is just popped up and gone ahead, right? And we can see authors as well. Arjun is there. Kiran is there. So I think the story is pretty clear, right? It started off with Star Trek. It has now ended with making my own lab in the system where we actually do R&D. And I think I met Sunil last week in the lab as well. The whole perspective is that science fiction really tells us where we are going because of the rapid change of tech that that is happening. We started off with mobile phones, of course, in our hands, and incidentally, mobile phones really came about because of Star Trek, which you have the flip of the Motorola phone. But today you had Apple phones in which you are actually holding in your hands. Went ahead to really looking at AI in terms of what you can do in automation, and now in terms of quantum of what we are looking at in the future. So I think for us, the job that I do, it's very, very important for me to look at what's there in the future. not necessarily in the near future, but even in the far future as well. And that's where fiction really comes in, where we say, look, if we can get inspired by that fiction, we can possibly produce science today. It may be far off, but that's what it is. So that's science fiction for us in terms of application.
Thank you, Nikhil, for that. We also have with us Dr. Arun Bharadwaj, who's a scientist from the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. He's an, apart from doing a lot of research in the sensor domain, he is also a science fiction fan and a reader. And he's a very important person for us because at the end of the roundtable, when we collate the recommendations, we are going to take his help to get these recommendations to the right ministries in the government, right? So a very warm welcome, Dr. Arun Bharadwaj. And could you please talk about your association with science fiction?
Thank you, Reena. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Compared to all other panels, I am not a writer in that science fiction, but has been a reader. And last 6 years has been more in a policy domain of science in Office of Principal Scientific Advisor. And prior to that, 19 years in ISRO Ahmedabad, where actually built the cameras for the space. So since childhood, I had read a lot of things, and few things in the last few days that also came to my mind, that in few of the novels which were not purely science fiction, I mean, they were more in a nature of political novel, but there were certain things which you can per se say a science fiction. One thing I just came to my mind is our George Orwell's novel of 1984. It's more of about some communist country and where the all citizens are being tracked. So there are many instances where every citizen has a camera in their home. Now we see many CCTV camera, how the citizens are tracked. That novel was written way back in 1948. So many other novels are there where the original theme is not science fiction, but I will also go about that. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Professor Arun Bharadwaj. We also have with us Professor Indranil Chakravarti, who is a quantum physicist, works as an associate professor in the Center for Quantum Science and Technology at IIIT Hyderabad. Apart from being a scientist, he has also published 2 poetry books and written science fiction short stories. So we have somebody who is, sitting on the borderline of all these distinctions we are creating about authors and scientists. So very welcome, a warm welcome to you, Professor Indranil Chakravarti. And could you please share your association and thoughts around science fiction?
Thank you, Reena, and thank you for organizing such a wonderful meetup. And it was very nice to be present over here and talk about science fiction. Yes, science fiction is something that we all had read in our childhoods and actually pursued us to take a career in science. So these short stories like from Isaac Asimov's book, like Franchise from Isaac Asimov, or the stories from Arthur Clarke, all these stories have actually played some kind of role in the back end to think about the discovery, the joy of the discovery, and the essence of understanding the truth and the essence of understanding the imagination. So yeah, science fiction is a very strong field of literature which we need to more work on, and there can be lots of things, as Professor was telling before, lots of things that can be associated with science fiction. Yeah, so I think science fiction is a very good topic that we need to discuss and we need to understand more in details.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Indranil. And we have with us Professor Enrique Solano. He is on the International Advisory Board for QETCI. He is also the only international person outside India on this call, and that is because of the kind of support he has been regular connect support inputs that he's been providing to QETCI as the member of the International Advisory Board. He is apart from working on creating usable quantum computers, is also working on at the intersection of art and quantum, primarily with a bigger focus of creating these multidisciplinary environments of how quantum could be used in many scenarios. He's the CEO of Kipu Quantum, which is a startup in Munich. He's also the CEO of Quanvia in Bilbao and an honorary professor at Ikerbasque, Bilbao. So thank you very much, Professor Solano, for being with us today. And could you share your association with science fiction, and also a little bit about, one aspect is, when we're talking about science fiction is exciting people, but you are taking actual solutions to create more awareness, right? And make quantum much more widespread. Could you, share that association with everyone?
Thanks, Rina, for organizing such an amazing roundtable on science fiction and for having me here. Yes, as you said, I have been working through 20 years on widespread topics, interdisciplinary topics relating quantum optics, quantum physics, quantum information, quantum computing, quantum simulation. And recently I have entered into the entrepreneurial activities for making quantum computers useful in industrial applications. And we will soon announce, by the way, the opening and the investments of the company. But related to science fiction, I wanted to say a little different things, of the amazing members of the panel. As a quantum technologist, from my point of view, and my pioneering work in creating the field of quantum arts, I have also developed through my academic career the concept of quantum theater, quantum digital artworks in the blockchain, or relating quantum technologies to artistic expression. And like 10 years ago, you could trace back still in internet, I was giving a tour around the world where the title of my talks were called Quantum Theater, Quantum Science Fiction, because contrary to the amazing creativity, science fiction is a reservoir for creating novel ideas. And my job has always been to making them real. So let's say not to leave them on the paper or on the videos or on the films, but to bring them to reality. And I created this concept of quantum science fiction where my job was to say how experiments and how quantum computers can fake the observer and create quantum virtual realities that just amaze, that are contradicting, right? And then just to finish, for example, I took atoms and photons and I forced them to behave in a way that contradicts their fundamental laws. And I had a lot of fun to play the game of making fundamental laws of physics behaving, contradicting fundamental laws of physics. And that's something that's a playground where we can meet great writers and filmmakers to share and to tell them that quantum technology is allowed to make reality. It is virtual science fiction with a quantum computer perspective. And I would be glad to discuss this with you today.
Thank you so much. We also have with us Professor Urvashi Sinha, who is working in the area of quantum for photonics for a long time. She's a member of the Light and Atomic Matter Physics Group at the Raman Research Institute at Bangalore, India. And she's also an affiliate member at the Institute for Quantum Computing, Waterloo, Canada, as well as the Center for Quantum Information and Quantum Computing at the University of Toronto. And then she's also representing India in in several international standards and industry forums. And as recently, her team did some very remarkable work in quantum, where they sort of refuted Einstein in terms of how quantum physics impacts at a macro level when we look at reality, right? And I'm keeping this very, very non-technical. We don't want to really get into the technical details, but some remarkable work happening there. Thank you very much. Warm welcome, Professor Sinha, for joining. And can you please share your association with science fiction and what are your thoughts?
So thanks a lot, Reena, first of all, for organizing this. And of course, the wonderful panelists that are here. I'm sure, it's going to be a very interesting discussion. So thanks a lot. So as you rightly say, that I work in a field which if I talk to the uninitiated person, they think it is science fiction. So, the people here are, of course, much better aware of quantum, but then most people aren't. So, I have had some wonderful experiences with funding agencies as well, when we started off in India, where they thought what I was doing was perhaps science fiction, and wanted to invest in the real science. But then, as Enrique very nicely said, our job is to actually ensure that what seems like science fiction is actually converted to real science, and so that's what we are doing. And in the domain, the experiment that you pointed out is about proving realism wrong. And I mean, it could be a very nice topic for a fiction novel as well. But then one thing that I definitely feel about science fiction, because as very many people said before me, that, we've all grown up reading different sorts of novels. And so Isaac Asimov has this quote, that today's science fiction is tomorrow's science fact. And so I would say that, quantum science and technology is a domain where, we are very much invested in converting some of this fiction to fact. But of course, sometimes people get over enthusiastic and the representations turn out to be hilarious as well. And so, some of us are knowledgeable enough to have a laugh at that. But I would just end by saying that, science fiction is a genre which actually feeds our imagination. And so whatever be our background, it is something that actually tells you about possibilities which perhaps don't exist around you right now. And then it's great for children, it's great for adults, it's great for all age groups. So I think that is why it is so wonderful to talk about it, and also to do something to make people more aware of its importance, right? So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much. And with that, I can see there are a lot of other people whom we know. I can see Sunil Gupta is there. So welcome, Sunil. And, while we're going through these discussions, we will also ask for inputs from everybody. So request to everybody is hold on to your questions, put them in the chat, and we'll definitely take up some of those recommendations as well as questions also as part of this discussion. Now let's start the discussion. We've already seen a little bit of context setting for science fiction. My question to everybody on the table is, what is the type of science fiction that excites you? And are there any examples? And when I say type, there are, there are hard science fiction, there is soft science fiction, and science fiction which almost borders towards fantasy. I mean, so what's your take on this? And then from a society perspective, where do you think is the soft spot?
So, Reena, do we just start shouting? And because I raised my Zoom hand, but I don't know if that is relevant.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand. Please go ahead.
No problem. No, because you asked the question which is very exciting. Because what excites me is about escaping the Earth, so to speak. So any science fiction which deals with travel to outer space, or sitting in outer space doing something, or all the imagination about how I won't say people, but beings outside space would behave and look like. That is the kind of imagination which really excites me. And so if any science fiction, anything happens in that genre, in the movies or whatever, right? So that would be the first thing I would really definitely like to go and watch. Because I do believe that, it's very wrong for us to think that human beings are, the best possible entities in this universe. I think that would be very arrogant. And I would love to actually meet in my life another species, if possible, to share anecdotes with. So that would be the genre that I would think is most exciting so far as I'm concerned. So I wanted to raise hand.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I would like to give my opinion now, just to go backwards in time, because we arrive in this order. So I will tell you something amazing that I have discovered through my career and I'm working on now related to science fiction. When the oral word was created or developed, in Darwinian terms through the history, then we invented stories and people started to tell stories and the oral traditions were kept. Then was invented writing in different forms. And then people start to write, their imagination in stories. Also possibly religion has a relation to that. Then we discovered, a photograph, and we created art and fiction through photograph. Then we invented videos, and then we created films. And then we started to mix all of them. In the last years, we have contributed to the development of quantum technologies. And this is just a new way of encoding information. So my job, and I invite you all to think that it is a time to develop quantum science fiction, where instead of oral tradition, written tradition, photograph and videos, now we use atoms, photons, quantum systems, quantum computers as the new raw material to create fiction. And that's where I have been working on in the last years. And I find this amazing. So there is a possibility today to combine artificial intelligence, virtual reality, quantum computers, and to create this concept of quantum arts and quantum metaverse for all of us, right? That's my first contribution, and that's where I would like, so I would like to respect all the evolution of fiction and to add the last stone that will be to use quantum computers to make that fiction happen in our imagination.
I mean,
Yeah.
if I may contribute to this a little, I think Dr. Sinha talked about, space opera and hard science fiction. I think it's very intriguing to see how authors tend to like the softer versions of speculative fiction, while scientists tend to enjoy the sort of more clinical and scientific version. Dr. Sinha, I too am a great fan of space opera. Although I think you'll be faced with this problem that when Richard Feynman was asked if there's intelligent life in outer space, he said you'd be hard-pressed to find intelligent life on Earth. So it may be a while yet before you meet an interesting alien. So I do like space opera immensely, particularly Jack Vance. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of the 50s and the 60s and the pulp novellas, which really started the boom in science fiction. And as Dr. Solano put it so succinctly, in fact, something very similar to what he talked about was speculated on by Neil Stephenson about 20 years ago. Also in a wonderful book called Snow Crash, they talk about the Namshub, the Babylonian word for the basic engram through which civilization was seeded. And I think it's very exciting to see these ideas that we saw in the late 80s and the early 90s now starting to come to fruition. I also think that all our wonderful speakers here today mentioned one word which we all have in common, which is imagination. And I think that really is what science fiction and science have in common. It's a gateway to unlocking the imagination. And with the current proliferation of social media and the shortening of attention spans, we are slowly seeing, I won't say the death of imagination, but sort of the great new worlds which Star Trek talked about sadly are being replaced by memes and news cycles that change every hour. And I think what's for me, the real golden age of science fiction was the 50s, 60s, beginning with what happened with Robert Howard, and how that slowly grew into an entire movement. And I think what it comes down to is, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, if you'll just bear with me. One of the finest of India's writers of science fiction is Jayant Narlikar, who also is a very well-respected scientist. And Mr. Narlikar, Dr. Narlikar rather, talks about how it's not to write something or create something isn't just about finding answers, it's about challenging the unknown. And I think that's what's exciting for us so science fiction is exciting. It's not the genres that already exist, it's about the new genres that are being born every day. We're seeing stuff like Afrofuturism. We're seeing stuff like urban fantasy, which Kiran writes extraordinarily well, if I may say so. So I just think it's exciting to not just admire the genres that exist, but also to be able to try new genres. And that's my two.
Sure. And with that, can we request Kiran? I see your hand raised. Kiran, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Thanks so much, Reena, and thank you, Arjun, for that kind mention. It's been so interesting listening to everyone's thoughts on it, Dr. Urvashi, Dr. Enrique, and yes, Arjun, the possibilities and the important thing is imagination, and I think that's what all of us really, really look at, how science fiction has developed our imagination. For me, while going interstellar is important, and to, as a reader, my most fascinating read, I think, was Terry Pratchett, because it was interstellar, but it was funny, it was humorous, it was slice of life, it was what could happen to you if you got stuck in space with very strange creatures and only had a towel to save you. But having said that, I think what fascinates me as a reader, because that was your question, Reena, is the possibility of what human life can be and what humans could be. And to that end, where does singularity come in? I'm a very basic science person. I sort of got through science with great difficulty in my college and school. I dropped it not long after. So I won't even pretend to have any working knowledge of hard science. But the possibility of human life, of how, artificial life, of how we will all evolve and what would happen from the point where Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein back then and set us off all on the journey of, life being assembled on a, operating on a table to what we could be. I think that fascinates me as a reader, as well as much as, going beyond the interstellar barrier. That's my 2 bits.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that's a whole line of progress that is happening in that space, both from an artificial intelligence perspective, as well as cellular biology and devices that can support and augment human beings. So I think that one could run wild with imagination on that front. Thank you so much, Kiran. Indranil, Professor Chakravarti, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Would you like to share your thoughts?
So actually, it's nice to hear from all of you regarding the different types of your likings regarding the science fiction. So I would like to tell few things about the science fictions, what kind of science fiction that I like. So with it is best to give you the help of an example. Say if you take this famous short story by Isaac Asimov called Franchise. So it talks about in future the United States has converted a system called electronic democracy, where there is a kind of a computer called multivac which selects single person to answer a number of questions, and on that basis of that questions the actual election is done, and there is no such to avoid the involvement of the lots of people, this kind of a singular person was taken into as a candidate for the election. So this kind of science fiction, so not only just talks about the scientific aspects of building up a computer which will do this electronic democracy, but also talks about social political impacts and asks us fundamental questions that are associated with human life. So what is important that how the science fiction is, how this story is affecting the human life. Means there is one of the major challenges what I feel in case of science fiction is that there is a kind of a conflict, the more the authors can tell about this, there is a kind of a conflict that happens with the science fiction way of writing and the postmodernism way of getting into things, right? So we, in the general science, in the hard science fiction, what we do is that we just bother about, bother about the scientific truth rather than worrying about the nuances that are associated with the truth and the impact that are associated with the process, with the humans that are involved in this whole process. So this kind, so I think, for example, I can also not only about social and political truth, but also about emotional depth that are associated with the story. One particular example in this can be Stanislaw Lem's the famous novel called Solaris. The Solaris where Tarkovsky, there's a very fantastic film by Tarkovsky, which on Solaris, and it talks about a mysterious planet where there is a space station. The spacecraft is halted over there, and it talks about how the mental state of the people, of the crew, is getting changed because of this staying in that planet. So how this is affecting the mental state of the people. So all these emotional depths, what I feel that on all these emotional depths are to be incorporated in a science fiction, which will actually relate to not only with the joy of the discovery of new things, new invention, but also the people who are associated and the people whose lives are going to get affected with this kind of discoveries. There is another example with which I would like to end. Say, for example, if you take Interstellar and Christopher Nolan's the famous thing, the famous movie, The Interstellar, it also it brings out a kind of an existential crisis, asking the fundamental questions of being human, that whether he is a caretaker or an explorer. So this kind of crucial, so in a sense, it brings it doesn't give a judgment on what has to be done, but also it actually brings out, without being judgment, it brings out the questions that are relevant in that time. Yeah, so that is my take on science fiction.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Professor Indranil. I think one of the critical aspects I feel is that science fiction, when it is written correctly and with the full 360-degree view, it actually gives a window to the future of society and the future of life on the planet and beyond, right? And it prepares everyone for the possibility of what could be. So while it seems simple that we saw a communicator which you could flick open in the Star Trek, right? When there was no such device, existing on the planet, and then everybody has those kind of phones that they use as communicator. It's easy to imagine and accept that environment. Similarly, that reminds me of Six and Leo and Isaac Asimov. So Isaac Asimov, in all of his stories, he actually projects how society is going to move forward as well. And then Six and Liu, is a Chinese writer. His books are also amazing in terms of he examines sociological impact, he examines political impact, he examines impact of meeting entities and how we perceive them and what is the failure of human thinking. What is the limitation, because he projects a reality where there is a alien race which decides to annihilate, destroy the human race. And so he raises the question of why do we always believe that the aliens that we meet will be benign entities, because all the history of discovery on this planet has proven otherwise, right? It has caused conflict, and it has almost always eradicated the natives of a land that was discovered by another society, right? So a fantastic thing that you just brought up. With that, we move on to Nikhil. You've been raising your hand and
Well, I've raised my hand and I take a solemn pledge that I won't talk about quantum, number one. I'm not going to talk about Asimov. I'm not going to talk about space because I think everybody's talked about it, right? In some way or the other. But I'm going to talk about what we technologists feel is the part of our fiction which we like, right? So we are in a dilemma. And for fiction, for us, is a state that has not occurred as yet. And that's what keeps us going. That's what keeps us innovating. And that's some of the challenges that my lab is actually looking at. I'll give you a few examples. Number one, India is a land of 1645 dialects, 27 mother tongues. There's not a single computer that can actually talk the same language, even though we say that AI has cracked natural language understanding. That's fiction for me. That's a problem for me to solve. And that's what keeps me going. Number two, we keep talking about self-driving vehicles. Come down to India, and self-driving vehicles is an art rather than a science. That's fiction. That's a state that has not occurred as yet. Number three, if you really talk about machines are intelligent in terms of the real AI, we have not even reached real AI in the real sense of AI, right? And that's fiction for me, because that state hasn't existed. For us technologists, fiction has always been something that has been a guiding force, like a starry-eyed system. We do work on quantum, we do all the sorts of that stuff. But it's also about creating that practical fiction and bringing it back to science that we really like, which is essentially what we really do with people. And that gives us essence as engineers, that gives us essence as technologists, and that gives us essence that we've actually brought down science fiction to science. Please remember that there would have been no phone for you if somebody would have not created that electronic fab mechanism to give you the phones that you today have in your hand. Please remember that there was no mechanism of communicating like we are doing today if Turing and then, of course, Van Landauer and some of the others would have not, created a kind of, mechanical chips, or chips as we call as electronic chips that we do. Yes, quantum is important. Yes, that science is important in moving towards that life. But for us technologists, it's about creating that value for those, when you can pick up something from that and create science now, that's fiction for us.
Sure. That's the most relevant fiction you're saying. That's what I mean. Yeah.
And we call it practical fiction.
Most relevant and practical, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's the one that excites you, is what I'm hearing.
Nikhil, I know Anil Kumar Sharma has his hand up. I just want to respond to Nikhil for 1 second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Nikhil, in fact, Kiran is part of it. We are putting out an anthology called Third Eye, which is an anthology of Indian science fiction. And when we were compiling it, we had a very interesting young man from Bangalore reach out to us who said that he has a short story which has been written entirely by AI. And I was very excited at the thought of including this in this book. I was serving as the editor, and he sent it in, and it was actually quite a decent story. So then we did a little bit of due diligence, and sadly we found out that he had written it himself and pretended that it had been written by AI. So I think AI is very exciting, but I still think that we still have to get past the Indian jugaad mentality before we can actually see.
I agree, and that becomes fiction for us, Arjun, right? So that is the fictional part for us. That is still a fiction. Right? And that
is always difficult.
Exactly.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, no worries. Anil, you had something to say, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, I think somehow my camera is one off, is not working. So what I'll do is after I speak, I will log off, and then you have to add me in again.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
No. Anyway, now we'll continue. So, see, my view. See, I wanted to give you a few specific examples of what works for me, right? So maybe I'll take some examples, right? I'll take an example of an episode from Star Trek called Measure of Man. I think that the story here goes that android officer, Lieutenant Commander Data, right? He was threatened by Starfleet research that they want to replicate him. And then there is this courtroom drama, right, with Captain Jean-Luc Picard in favor of Data's right for self-determination, right, in order for whether he should be declared property of Starfleet. Right, so I think this. I think that was very interesting. It was a very interesting episode. I think why it was important. Of course, it touched on the topic of slavery, right, and the rights of artificial life forms and AI. I think so. See, these issues have started becoming real for us in terms of both threat from AI, the ethics of using AI in critical systems, and of course, when systems start taking decisions, all right, how do you address such issues? As an example of something which opens up a mind to possibilities of things which you need to think, right? So, in fact, the work from this even excited the work on computer ethics in University of Kentucky, right, on cyborg rights. So, I think science fiction does create new line of research, which may be something in future. Similarly, I think this whole series which I read is 12 Tomorrows by MIT Press. Again, I'll give you one example of variables like what Google had done, right? What kind of societal issues you would come up, right, if you allow those freely in the society. And there is a story which illustrates the kind of principles government could put in place to address some of these issues which will come up. For that matter, I think Black Mirror is a fantastic example of science fiction which shows you what could with technologies like social networks, gaming, right? And then they do give very plausible explanation of what things are. So 12 Tomorrows on MIT Review, I would encourage everybody to read. That gives you a lot of such stories. They have been trying to publish this yearly in last couple of years. And then there was another episode I would pick up, which was The Inner Light, again a Star Trek episode, where interestingly here Picard is attacked by a sensor, right, in space, and then he is out for a couple of minutes. But in this couple of minutes, the sensor gives him an experience of 40 years as lifetime as Cameron, right, was a humanoid scientist whose planet was threatened by Nova of his sun. And it just happened that this civilization had created this probe because they could not reach a level of maturity to go beyond their solar system, but they could create a probe which somebody else could experience the civilization. Of course, very interesting idea here, but this could also be useful for in future for experiential learning, right? People who have learned in past, gone to places, you could use such technology even for neurodivergent people. So a lot of possibility it comes out from this. I think somebody just mentioned languages. I think there was one episode in Star Trek Next Generation called Darmo. Here, I think the universal translator failed because the kind of language which Darmok was speaking in metaphors, right? Which is like Temba, his arms are wide, and then it was a very interesting episode. Picard had to use analogy from Earth culture to communicate. And interestingly, that see after that episode, there was a lot of research done. The Tamarin language has been compared to internet memes and image macros. In fact, there is research done on this by somebody who has the research is called Darmok and Jalat on internet. This is an article on the ResearchGate. Substantial research has been done on how you could use this kind of language and representation of such language in our cultures. And of course, I think what I would also recommend a book written by Thomas Parham called Hailing Frequencies Open, Communication in Star Trek. This picks up many elements of communication technologies and communication experiences which may have useful innovations in future. I think there's one more, but maybe I have many, but
yeah, I think
No, sorry. I just wanted to add here, Reena, just for a couple of seconds. I think the point that Anil made on languages. I think people know that one of the prime most faceted in Star Trek is Klingonese, and Klingonese actually evolved out of 28 such scripts that were discovered. Right, so it's a fictional language, but today in the world there are about 100 or 200 speakers of Klingonese as a language, which was used by Klingons in Star Trek, and it was necessarily built by looking at 28 scripts in the world to create that language. So I think that's what the mixture of fiction to science is happening, where you're thinking about a state which does not exist, and then you're essentially creating that state, right? So yeah.
Correct. Maybe just I want to take some Indian examples which I saw recently. See, there is this series called Guilty Minds on Netflix. It is again a courtroom drama, but there are two cases which were picked up. Very interesting use case. One case was AI generating music by sampling other music. I think that this picked up, this actually discussed the nature of copyright in AI, right? The attribution model, moral rights, background work, and this is very real, right? There was an auction at Christie's for 400K, and then a lot of issues were raised on how that AI art was created with background of Google Tech, the human data which was collected and all that, right? So very real issues are being picked up even in Indian genre. This is like this is an episode which was just recent, and then they had picked up another one which is a case of accident.
Anil, sorry, I'll have to cut you short. We are running out of time. And I'll tell you the takeaway that I have from all the examples, wonderful examples that you've given. We talked about society, impact on society. We talked about taking imagination and making it real earlier. And now you're talking about how science fiction can also provide us the right impetus for looking at more issues which may lead to policy decisions for the government. More issues which will help us, drive a better understanding of what could happen, because stories are able to convey in a better manner of what the possibilities could be. And it would be easier to convince some of the people who believe, for example, Dr. Urvashi Sinha was talking about how some people would believe that she's proposing that she works on science fiction rather than science. So when you tell these stories in a manner where the science is kept intact, I think it is easier to probably persuade some of those people as well. So thank you very much. I see one last on this topic. I will take one last input, and I think that's Dr. Arun Bhardwaj, who has his hand raised for quite a while. And if you could quickly say what you have to say, we'll move to the next question.
Yes, the other than space travel, and my take is more closer to what Professor Indralini Chakrabarti was mentioning. So the fiction which I have been like and looking for is like human psychology. So that actually came to my mind. There is a very old novel. The novel's name is Picture of Dorian Gray, written by Oscar Wilde. So that's Oscar Wilde. It is in a different genre. The main character there is a portrait made of that main character, and it's so beautiful. The main character, Dorian Gray, utters that if God could keep him young and his picture becomes older, so actually that becomes the truth. Although it seems very absurd, But nowadays, I think many of the research are going on to stop the aging, slowing down the aging. So interest is towards the how the human psychology works and what we can get it out of it. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And I actually interviewed somebody who's working on longevity. They're creating pills for you to keeping people younger. And they're no longer talking about longevity, they're talking about reverse aging. Right? That's the conversation. And some of the people that are interviewed, they're 55 years old. You'll see them on the interview. They are 35. They look like they are 35 or something. They are experimenting on themselves, right? So science fiction again becoming very close to science. I would say, let's quickly jump to the next two important questions that we have. And I'm going to just allocate 15 minutes each for this question. The first question is, why do you think that in India we do not have, in the current context, today, when we look at science fiction worldwide, science fiction is not as much present in India. First of all, do you agree? And then what is the reason? And I think here I would first want to ask the authors, right? Kiran, if you can start off and then we move forward with the other people.
So why don't we have a rich culture of science fiction? We do have science fiction. As Arjun mentioned, we had Satyajit Ray, who wrote what eventually became E.T., much disputed, but I mean, we all know about it, that his story eventually led to Spielberg making E.T. We have Jayant Harlikar, who's written wonderful science fiction, a scientist himself. We have some wonderful science fiction writers. Why do we not have a preponderance of science fiction? I think because our mythology is taking the role of science fiction in the hearts and minds of our readers. So we are at a space where we are still looking at the past, but we are willing to look at the future. As readers, I talk about our country as a reading populace. Also, I think science is looked at as something that is meant to be studied, not as something for enjoyment. So we are very earnest and very serious about our degrees in whatever field of science we take up. But reading for enjoyment and, looking at science fiction as a possibility, as something that would give us joy and pleasure, I think is not something that is paramount in the minds of the reading audience. Having said that, we recently are seeing very, very strong initiatives. Arjun's Third Eye, a wonderful anthology of Indian science fiction, is coming out soon. We have science writers like Tashan Mehta, we have Indra Pramit Das, we have S.V. Sujata, we have Arjun himself, who's done some wonderful work. So many of them, Samit Basu, writing wonderful science fiction, which are also getting onto the long lists of awards. And I think more visibility for this, if we just look at the way science fiction has been promoted by the government in China, and we have such wonderful science fiction coming out from there, even in terms of the way the books get made into movies and the way it gets read, they get popularized. We have Sixteen Liu, we have so many of them writing wonderful science fiction. I think if there's an earnest attempt from all quarters to promote science fiction as something that is enjoyable and something that can be read and something that's popular, rather than something that is very niche and for a select audience, I think that is something we should all look at as both writers and policymakers and people within the field.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. My only question to that is, if you look at all of the science fiction movies from the West, they actually do very well in India. It's not as if they don't do well in India. But we don't have any science fiction movies. And even hard science fiction movies like Interstellar did well in India. On the other hand, our movies, even if they attempt science fiction, there is a tendency to go overboard with the fantasy angle, and really it becomes a hodgepodge towards the end, right?
So this is the point, Reena, sorry to butt in, is where what you spoke about earlier, to have actual scientists on board when you're making the thing.
Right.
So that is important. That is what we don't have, to have actual background, solid background before even the script is put in place. I stay in the realm of soft science because my science is not strong, but those who have the background and who have the technical expertise and the know-how definitely get into the hard science part of it. And I'm sure there will be readers if it's written very well.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, Arjun.
I think you answered your own question wonderfully well. Indian viewers and Indian readers are watching Western science fiction, reading Western science fiction. I mean, they're reading Chinese science fiction and Japanese science fiction in India, but they're not reading Indian science fiction at all. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes. Arjun, I can hear
Yeah.
you. Can I
Arjun,
ask you a question
I
to
think-
that?
Yeah.
To the fact that you said that people are not
But
reading
if
Indian
I
science
may-
fiction.
Well, Kiran said it wonderfully well. Mythology is the death knell of science fiction. We are a country where mythology rules supreme on the bestseller list. And, it's the same problem that you're seeing in film, in cinema. The closest we come to science fiction in India is mythological. Even that is inescapable. When Rajamouli makes a film, I think it's very decent speculative fiction. But you aren't going to break free from the mythological mold anytime soon. The problem, I think, fundamentally is that Indian publishing is really going through a state of flux. Things are changing. The reason why, I think a big reason why science fiction and fantasy are so popular in the West, it's because you have seen specialized imprints putting them out. Like, or, who are putting out, specifically putting out science fiction books. I think we're also at the mercy of the booksellers. Sorry, my camera seems just frozen, so I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I'm going to continue for a second. All our panelists talked about Star Trek. I'm a big Star Trek fan myself. You talked about Asimov. You talked about Arthur C. Clarke. These were the books that were available in the 80s and the 90s. You didn't see books by Indian writers sharing shelf space with these very well-known Western writers. I also think language is a huge barrier because some of the most innovative and wonderful writing in India just now is coming out. It's regional languages, and we are really seeing it's a landmark here with Gitanjali Shri and the Tomb of Sand actually winning the Booker Prize, which is a book in translation. You're really seeing the arrival of Indian literature in regional languages. And I think what remains, I think the experiment has begun. I think what remains to be seen is what the outcome will be. The Golan's book of South Asian fiction, which you mentioned earlier, and which I'm privileged enough to have a story in as well, has sold very well. So we are hoping that we will see a lot more. In many ways, the sort of beginning of the golden age of American science fiction was when Harlan Ellison published this book called Dangerous Vision. And I think we're starting to see that now. We finally reached a point where a golden age of Indian science fiction is beginning. And I can only hope that scientists take a few minutes away from their research and maybe try their hands at writing some science fiction, because I think we need inventive and innovative and exciting new voices to boldly go where no author has gone before.
All right, thank you. Any thoughts from the scientists on what could be done? What is happening, and do you agree? And what could be done?
Yeah, can I add, Dina?
Yes, please.
I agree with a couple of points because there is indeed what I will say. There is indeed a good set of writings in Indian literature on science fiction, as mentioned about Satyajit Ray, Jayanta Vishnu Narlikar, all the Anish Dev. There are huge number of writings, but there are also these writings needs to be translated in all possible Indian languages. This is something that we have to do a collective effort. So because those writings are in the respective Indian languages, so for the other peoples to read, emphasis should be given on this translation aspect of that the gems that are created in the Indian literatures within the regional languages. This is one thing that I feel that should be there as a conscious effort from all of us. And yes, so another thing that I want to say, the representation of science fiction in movie is not that good in Indian scenario. The reason One of the reasons that I will say is that the representation of scientists in media, I generally see, if you take a small kind of a script, whenever any kind of a serial, the representation of a scientist is a kind of a person who is having a white hair and all these typical stereotypes, and he is having this kind of a retort, and there is no other way of showing scientists. There is a retort and something chemicals are burning, all these kind of stereotype representations are happening in the media. Either so this extreme representation of a scientist, and when somebody is making a script on a scientist, let us take this production
or a madman in the lead, right? So the second representation is a madman scientist.
Man, so always been there, like all this. And also, if somebody is a scientist, how his room or her room will look like. So there is not a single book. So I'm just taking about a particular script. There is not a single book over there in his room. So this kind of what kind of books it will be there. So a little bit of research is to create and this kind of representation is actually alienates people from the scientists. This kind of representation is alienating people. So yeah, so I think I need to work a lot on the film scripts on science fiction. And also I completely agree with Kiran that on that part, in case of Interstellar, what actually the scientists who were part of the movie who had actually produced that movie. So so that they also keep a check on the factual correctness of the things, the factual correctness of the things, what they are saying in the movie. So this kind of an collaborative approach has to be there. So, and what is, and in particular, this movie sector is lacking that. And the last thing is that in the genre of writing, there is a lot of cliche, in the sense that all the kind of science fictions is evolving around the robots, the same set of topics that are coming into the picture. There can be more subtle topics associated with science fiction. People do not go into those, do not touch those topics.
Because the maturity is not there, right? So those Interstellar is very mature. Like it's a huge risk to take to make a movie like Interstellar, because it's complex, right? Yeah. So thank you so much. And I'm going to request Professor Solano and Professor Sinha to actually share their views on this as well. I see their hands are raised.
Yeah, so I would like to add something, and I was just writing also a comment. Essentially, there is a divorce, a historical divorce between arts, fiction, and science and technology. And depending on the academic tradition or technology tradition of the countries, it can become worse. What I mean exactly is that, for example, historically, Carl Sagan, who is one of my heroes also from dissemination of science and technology, when he started doing that, he was banned, he was criticized, like he was banalizing science, talking in so simple terms to the audience. And science fiction most of the times are related to literature, to artists, and this is not welcome in many too serious academic traditions. And that's something, by the way, that I suffer myself. When I started working on quantum arts, immediately the comments, public and hidden, were, his career is wasted, and there is no hope for that. He has no more interesting ideas, so that he's playing around with that. And I think in India, I don't know enough, but you may need a program that tries to really identify that science fiction is the main source and reservoir of creativity, opening the eyes, lateral thinking, for arts, for science, technology, and entrepreneurial activities. And that's the way I see it. And I miss it when I go around the world and I talk to people. Many people say, okay, or you are making fiction or you are making serious stuff. And I think the most serious way of making research, technology, and business is by allowing fiction to be around us, because this is the source of creativity. And I end up my comment on making an association that is not common, I consider it coming from my own thinking, but it could be easily traced back somewhere, is that the word art is related to the word artificial and artificiality, and everything that is artificial is strongly related to creativity and intelligence. The history of humankind, since the moment where somebody said, should I cross a river and perhaps get drowned, or should I use a stick to check the depth of the river before risking my life? To use a stick to try to measure the depth of a river is essentially an artificial object, an artifact. And this is the main origin of artificial intelligence, of science and technology. And we have overlooked that, that essentially, I will say it in a single sentence, artificiality and intelligence are the same. And artificiality is related to arts, to fiction, science fiction, and intelligence is related to technology, science, and business. And both, for me, are the same. And I work hard to make them together as a single. And when India and many other countries understand that there is not like cheap imagination and serious imagination, that imagination is a common field, then you would get science fiction, technology, science together, and that's the way to gather. There is no, let's say, serious imagination and non-serious imagination. And I think when we understand that, then the things get together, and we will create a strong ecosystem of creativity.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sinha. Your viewpoints?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just following up on some great points made by people, but just the recent one by Enrique really intrigues me, because he says that artificiality and intelligence are the same, and I don't know what to call myself anymore. I mean, so I lost my thread of thought listening to you, really. And so I have to think about this more, this very nice comment, which brings about an existential crisis, so far as I'm concerned. Regarding the question that Reena raised, whether science, I think there are two parts. One is whether science fiction exists in India, and then the other was about whether it's appreciated, right? I think I would distinguish between these. So the first part, I think, has been very nicely answered by the previous people, that, we have different examples of how science fiction has been created in stories as well as in movies. The second part, of course, is the one which is, I do believe the answer is no. I don't think we have that much appreciation for science fiction in India. And I think we cannot also, blame ourselves for that, because what is shown to us as science fiction does border on being quite ridiculous, to a sane mind. So, I mean, if that is what is fed to us, at least in the movie genre I'm talking about, then, we get disillusioned perhaps as to whether this is something that we should be interested in. And so what Indranil said is exactly what it is, that, we need a collaboration between scientists and science fiction movie makers to be able to come forth as a serious genre to begin with. And there Enrique's point is good, that there is no serious imagination and there is no non-serious imagination. We have to be imaginative, and that is how we will create this. But one thing I want to add here, which I don't think came across so far, is that the reason why I also believe we don't appreciate science fiction as much as we want to is perhaps we don't appreciate science as much as we would want to, really. I mean, as a scientist myself, I can definitely say that a large section of the population really is wondering what we are doing as scientists, unless we are doing something which is really something which can be taken up and popularized, which is not, which is 99% not true for most of what we do. Then, we have this vague notion of what scientists do, and it ends up with cliches like Indranil says, this white-haired person in a room in a lab coat, with the chemicals all burning all over the place. So that is what we are left with. So if we have to really increase appreciation for science fiction in India, equal effort has to go into emphasizing appreciation for science in India, because I think in every other place where we see people organically invested in science fiction, I think they also have some appreciation for the science as well. So this is something also, I believe, needs to be taken seriously. Thanks.
So isn't that a little bit of an oxymoron or a very weird situation for India, where every parent pushes their child to actually do science education?
it's a transactional mode, right, Reena?
Yeah, absolutely. I
We
agree,
we look at it as a transactional mode. It's a means to an end, and
It's a
that's what we
means-
really think of. Number one, I don't agree. So, sorry, I just wanted to make a point. I don't agree with Indranee and Urbasi on one point, that our imagination is only those gray-haired men. No, the reason is that's the only thing that's stuck. The earliest format of science fiction that all of us has witnessed in India was in 1985 with a serial called Dhoomketu. I think everybody would have watched it.
Yeah.
The scientist over there was obviously a portrayal of Jayan Narlikar at that point in time, and he was basically saying, look, this is what comets can do for us. Obviously, when you watch that movie and post that, there's a lot of hype around what happened over there. Science fiction completely dropped after it. So our connection to science fiction was, look, if we can make our bellies full, if our work is satisfied, only then I can think creatively about the future. So that's why India has always lagged in terms of understanding where we are going, right? And we don't have the time to think honestly in terms of 90% of the population to think and say, look, let's think creatively about the future. Well, the current challenge is not solved, right? And that's why science fiction hampers. And that's why that, those oxymorons or things that we actually develop into our heads. Number one. Number two, our kids are much better off, right? They're a different generation. If you talk to our kids today, they are in fact more sciencey and more fictiony in terms of what we could ever be. So it is changing at some point in time. It is going through a phase. But I think there's more that needs to be done in terms of, like, for example, Kiran mentioned or somebody else mentioned saying, put it in form of books, put it in form of writings. Let there be stories constructed. Let there be, we do hackathons in technology. Let's do bookathons in technology or in science fiction. Let people come in, 12 to 17-year-olds, huddle down for about 48 hours, create a book, short story science fiction book. And let's pick up the best books and then publish it, right? I think that's what we really need to do to pick up science fiction in India. But our kids are much better off in terms of what they're thinking about the future.
Yes, I think when you say our kids, you're talking about the urban population, and
Yeah,
that too limited
absolutely.
to a few large, few metros, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that doesn't
No,
even
but
touch.
the other thing is for villages and rural sectors, science fiction is about solving today's challenge.
Absolutely.
They can't solve today's challenge, right? That's fiction for them. Why would they go into depths of Star Treks and quantum if I can't make a square meal off during a day?
I have while I agree with you, Nikhil, I think if you look at how smartphones have reached our villages, right? Despite the other problems continuing, and how those are being used in many ways and
Exactly
many
my point.
forms.
Exactly
So,
my point. So
yeah.
you have to bring it to a practical fictional state which is usable,
Right.
and not just talk about the future of science. Tell them the future, but give them the present. So there has to be a bridge between the two.
So the bridge
Only
between the authors and the
scientists are technologists like us.
Scientists and the technologists. I think
Exactly.
more of this mixing is required, which we have started, right? All right. So now we already started hearing in this conversation some recommendations on what should happen. Can I ask everybody to open up a lot more about the recommendations? What can we do to change the situation? We can do bookathons, as Nikhil said, and then we can encourage people. We can change the way scientists are represented. We can encourage people to do that. What else? What else can we do? And I would like to put this question to Professor Arun, Dr. Arun Bhardwaj. What do you think the government can do in this case?
Thank you, Reena. First, I will not, because already that movie part is over, and I think my views are already same that scientists can be involved, because the concepts are not difficult, but because the movie maker is a commercial person, so he has to look on that commercial side, making, instead of science, it's a magical thing, focusing on a hero like Mr. India putting a clock in the neck and becoming invisible. But it should be a science concept can explain that movie without compromising on its commercial aspect. Now the question that you ask, yes, that is right. Many things can be done, which already many of our scientific societies, which are directly or indirectly funded by many ministries, they are doing. Which, while I was in ISRO at Gujarat, Ahmedabad, we used to do very regularly on the birthday of Vikram Sarabhai. Many of our scientists, young scientists, used to go to the remote villages in Gujarat, and there we used to explain in that school, which was in a village school. It was so fascinating for them when we bring the models of the rockets, we brought the models of the satellites, how they move around the earth, and then we explain them. So that even now when I am in 2022, some place I went in 2012, so the principal of that school still remembers that our team has gone there. So one way is that, as we were saying, the urban population is aware, the urban children are not that much cut off. But the real thing is that we cannot expect a rural population in a remote place to access all this information. When a physically somebody reaches there and explain them in their own local language, native language, which many of our scientists, they used to give a presentation in Gujarati, that made a lot of impact. So many of these scientific societies which already exist, they can be encouraged to reach out wherever they are stationed. Anything in Bangalore, they can move around in the nearby districts, Ahmedabad, Pune. So almost every big city has some or other scientific institutions. So the main thing is how we can connect with that rural population, and that will definitely encourage the children who do not have access to all this latest information to be encouraged towards science, and naturally then they can appreciate it.
Right. So I think whatever recommendations we make, we should, look to actually working with people like you and others to understand what the channels are, so that, whatever efforts happen, all those channels should get utilized.
Sorry,
That makes,
I have
yes, Arjun?
3 suggestions I think would help immensely. The first is we need to open more libraries, and we need to open free libraries. Okay. In the 80s and the 90s, we were making very positive steps towards making books easily available in India. 45% of all book sales that happen in the United States of America, that happen in Europe, go to libraries. Libraries foster publications, that in turn fosters the proliferation of new ideas. The reason we are losing readership to OTTs and I'm all for great cinema. Please do not get me wrong. But if you want to promote the reading habit, you have to make it possible for people to get books and get them cheap. If possible, get them free. For a country of 1 billion plus, we need more libraries. I mean, I live in Bombay. We don't have a state. We don't have a proper Bombay library. The only library we have is the Asiatic Library. The second thing is, after you build the library, buy books by Indian writers who are writing in these genres and stock the shelves. Because you walk into the libraries, you find endless tomes, again by Western writers, but even the libraries aren't buying Indian books. Okay. Another very important thing is you need to provide subsidies to publishers, especially publishers who are starting out. I'll give you an example. This year has been very difficult on publishers, primarily because the price of paper is through the roof. Good quality paper to print books on is almost impossible to come by for publishers this year. We are already struggling. The industry is already struggling because it has a very high input cost. The risk factor, I mean, we now live in a time where 4,000 copies sold is considered a bestseller. Because that should give you a sense of what's happening in the world of Indian publishing. It's not an
But Arjun, I think we need to use technology and science within the publishing industry as well. And there have to be a lot more online books, right? In the sense that I need not be Kindle. There could be some format, local, a lot of cheaper formats that are there.
To print the books online, you still have to have some subsidies for the publisher because the input costs of promotion and marketing,
Right.
there's so much noise out there. How do you get someone to read your book? And I mean, an example would be take book prizes. There isn't a single book prize for genre fiction in India, whether it be science fiction, whether it be history fiction. What's happening slowly but steadily is that the business of publishing, the business of we are not a country where we have to promote things which are exclusive. We have to promote things which are inclusive. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is the barriers between the educated and the elite are just going to, the barrier between them and the downtrodden and the poor is just going to keep growing. And the only way we can do that is if we foster, and that is actually one of the things what science fiction, one of the seminal ideas in all science fiction is the idea of inclusivity. So we need a concerted effort to not just write these books. I think Nikhil's idea is brilliant. Yes, have a hackathon, get kids to write it. But it isn't enough. Writing the book is the easy part. getting people to actually read it and buy it is the difficult part. And the only way, I'm very intrigued by what Wattpad is doing. Wattpad has made this now Pratilpi, which is doing a similar thing. They have actually made literature accessible, and accessibility is the key. If you want a genre to grow, and again, I'm not talking about science. I'm talking about science fiction and fantasy and speculative fiction. If you want us to grow the way China has grown, the way you've seen Europe, this massive boom in Scandinavia, in Germany.
Actually, South Korea actually has a lot of science fiction related movies and serials, right?
Great point, but you need to make it accessible. You see, and the accessibility doesn't come from the point of view just from the side of the creator. It has to come from the side of the audience as well. So we need to educate the people, and we need to make these things available to them. That's how it will grow.
Reena, I would just like a very short point, if you allow me.
Yeah, sure. Anil. Is that Anil?
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Let Dr. Anil speak.
No, who's speaking? Sorry, I missed that.
Dr. Arun, Reena.
I will only make a short point. I fully agree with Arjun.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I would just like to add that I live in Delhi, and all of us, all panelists here are who have been reading from their childhood the physical books, printed books, all of us. Now I had seen in Delhi there are Delhi public libraries, government libraries at every place. I got cards made for my entire family at 2 labs. I can assure you my kids never went there. And I used to get the books issued. But my point I want to make it to solve this problem, the push has to come from the parents and from the schools also. Every year there is a very good book exhibition in Pragati Maidan. So the push has to come from the schools also to encourage their students to go there in that book exhibition where they can find, because most of the kids are now, as everyone is saying, they are more used to the soft copies like PDF version on their mobile. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's very relevant. Yes, Anil.
I think, see, for anything to thrive, you need an ecosystem, right? So here, the ecosystem means many things, right? I think Professor Oversee mentioned the need for outreach from science, right? It is not very good in India. Of course, couple of institutions like in Pune, Ayuka does a very great job on something called SciPop, right? The ISR Pune does some activity here, but I think in general, the acceptance of science, right? I think we are losing steam, right? At least in 70s and 80s, our TV, Doordarshan had program like Quest, right? Run by Xavier's Institute in Calcutta, right? Very popular, nice programs on science. So I think it is probably science fiction. Along with that, the outreach needs to improve. How it improves? See, we have already built a lot of infrastructure like science museums. There are specialized centers for science education, right? So, see, they need to also tie in science fiction in their outreach, right? So make it more interesting. Maybe screen movies, the centers apart from what they're doing now. The other thing I feel is the part of books, right? I see that I think that at least the next generation is kind of moving away from physical books, right? So they do consume a lot of books, but short articles, the short movies, right? Even if it is 5-minute movie, 10-minute movie, I think this genre of short science fiction, right? Short stories. I think that is something we could encourage much faster, right? People reading 5-page, 10-page science fiction to start with, and I think other thing is the community, right? So today, if you look at any other, if I say science fiction is a hobby, everything else in India there is a hobby, right? Whether it's music, I am on say the communities for ham radio and photography, but I have no community for science fiction in India, right? So if it is there, I don't know.
I know. I think I can share something very personally. What I faced is I've been a science fiction fan throughout. In a group of mature people like you and me, I've actually had people question me saying, "Ye to bachon ka, this is supposed to be a focus for kids, right?" And I'm like, seriously, when did learning stop with kids? As you grow, you don't need to learn, but that is a very big part of the mentality also, which we need to overcome.
Reena, I just
Dina,
wanted
I
to
completely agree
sorry.
with you. Sorry,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Sorry. So, Dina, it's good that you bring that point. Most of the science fictions are mostly like child fictions, right? Rather than adult science fictions. This is one thing that you correctly point out. Yeah, I was also thinking about that. One of the reasons is that these kind of stereotypes are existing. The writing is mostly on child science fiction.
No, but I'm reading international books. I'm reading Six and Liu. No child can understand a Six and Liu book, right? It is so advanced in terms of projecting societal complications and things like that. I don't think any children, most of the children really will understand what the whole summary of that Six and Liu book is, right?
Reena,
So-
just one point I wanted to
Right.
make was, see, there's also a commercial benefit attached at the end of all of this. And I'll give you one example. From an industry point of view, what we look at it, we find people from a large genre and percentage have lost that creativity and passion. And there's a reason for it. The corporates have become kind of a job structure where I would do current science, current tech, but I would not think about the future, right? And the reason for that is, A, they were not taught well. They grew out of physics and mathematics, and they suddenly went into a coding structure. B, they were taught well, but they lost steam in the middle because the whole point was I have to earn money and make a bread or break a bread or whatever it is. The third point was that the corporate structure itself molded them in a format which said, look, do this work. This is today. Tomorrow can be seen later down the line. And I think that's also a benefit if we take this community angle of science fiction, as Anil was mentioning. We get this kinds of activities going. The kind of people that will enter into industry will have that large benefit of creativity angle as well. So we are not just doing science. We are also doing art. We are also doing creation. We are also doing passion in terms of what you could, because you can look towards the future and doing something. And that's very important from a commerce point of view as well. My comments to Dr. Arun as well, Dr. Bharadwaj, saying that if we can make this kind of an ecosystem, then industry would not ask you for a separate tax benefit on R&D. Special people kept on R&D because there's nobody. We would see that creativity just flows in as an ecosystem pipeline. So if that can be made, there's a commerce benefit as well.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think the kind of people that are required to run the business are not the same to visualize the business of tomorrow and make it happen, right? So especially from a tech perspective. And we are at the cusp of that timeline in history where suddenly multiple technologies are merging together. Even when we talk about artificial intelligence or quantum, let's not talk about quantum, but quantum is equally important. And then the kind of people who are required are people who care about science, not just technology, because artificial intelligence and quantum is all about understanding mathematics and physics as well. So the question is science fiction, but it has ramifications on the way we create technologists and science people for tomorrow. That's what I believe, and that's how important I think this topic is.
I think Reena, Anil here, I think so what we should do is, before we end today's call, at least maybe you should create at least a WhatsApp Telegram community. We will do a community, right, of people who are interested. Start with something where we can start. At least the people on the call today, I'm sure the audience had joined today because they're interested in this topic, right? They are probably consumer of science fiction, maybe authors. So we should at least create a simple community to start with and then see where it goes.
Sure, definitely we will do that. There are a lot of recommendations which are there in the chat, including people asking for a community like that, and probably creating a website to, sort of eventually host all the efforts that we are doing in this space. So a lot of interest seems to be there. So we will definitely do that. Clearly, this time was not enough for a discussion on a topic like this, but I think it's a good start. We've at least touched the surface of the topic. Created the baseline. There is interest in starting a community. We will do that and come back later with maybe regular meetings, maybe not very regular, not every day or every week, but maybe next month we can meet again to see if there is something that we want to do in this space. I'm also now seriously thinking that there is a hackathon that we are planning. Can we include a bookathon as part of that, right? And so that's something which I will take a poll from all of you. and other members of QETCI and see if that's something that we want to enable. Thank you so very much for this wonderful discussion. Thank you for all the people who joined to hear us and for all the comments that you left in. We are actually saving this entire session, so we will go through all the comments and use that for a reference as we move forward. With that, wish you all a very good rest of the day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Rina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reena.
Such a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you.